There is a pattern of societal collapse driven by the one thing no society can live without: food. It's a 7-stage sequence that has repeated throughout history with mathematical predictability. A sequence that takes a nation from stability and abundance to chaos and desperation. The United Nations World Food Program reports that multiple countries are facing deepening food insecurity. But this isn't a story about a distant crisis. It's a story about a system. A fragile, interconnected system that brings food to your table. And what happens when that system begins to fail? Not all at once, but stage by predictable stage. These aren't random events. They are data points. They are symptoms of a pattern that has played out in World War II Britain, in modern Venezuela, and in Lebanon. It is the story of how societies break. And the most critical part of this analysis? The evidence is undeniable. The United States has already entered stage 4. In this documentary, we will break down the 7 stages of this sequence. We will look at the history, and we will look at the data to show you exactly where we are in the pattern. This is not about fear. It is about understanding the mathematical certainty of the path we are on. Because the warning signs of what comes next are now impossible to ignore. Number 1. The 7-stage sequence of a food crisis. Before we examine the evidence, you need to understand the framework. This isn't a complex theory. It is a pattern of human behavior, a sequence of events that repeats when food becomes scarce. The stages are a ladder of escalation. Stage 1. Complacency and normalcy bias. The period before the crisis, where underlying problems in the food system are dismissed. Life feels normal, even as the vulnerabilities grow. Stage 2. Price shocks and supply chain strain. The first visible tremors. Prices for essential goods begin to rise sharply. Specific items become difficult to find. The problem is dismissed as temporary. Stage 3. The normalization of shortages. The temporary problems become permanent. People adapt. They get used to empty shelves and learn to hunt for basic goods. Precautionary buying, or quiet hoarding, begins. Stage 4. The crisis of faith and public anxiety. The tipping point. The problem is no longer just an economic issue. It is a source of widespread public anxiety. Anger and blame directed at the government and corporations become mainstream. Trust in the system collapses. This is where the data shows the U.S. is right now. Stage 5. Centralized control and rationing. When the free market can no longer effectively distribute food, the government is forced to step in. This stage is marked by price controls, official rationing, and government-run distribution. Stage 6. Breakdown of civil order. The system is visibly failing. Government controls lead to black markets. Food riots, looting, and the hijacking of supply trucks become common as people take matters into their own hands. Stage 7. Famine and societal reset. The worst-case scenario: a complete breakdown of the food distribution network, leading to widespread hunger, mass displacement, and a fundamental reset of society. Understanding these stages is like reading a blueprint. And the blueprint of today looks eerily similar to the blueprints of yesterday's disasters. Number 2. Stages 1 and 2. The silent tremors. Every systemic collapse begins with problems that are invisible to the average person. For a food crisis, stages 1 and 2, complacency and price shocks, are those moments when the foundation of a nation's food supply begins to erode, long before most people notice. Stage 1, complacency, is the belief that because things have always been a certain way, they will continue to be that way. In the years before 2020, the United States was the definition of complacency. Food was cheap and abundant. The idea of a food shortage in the world's wealthiest nation was unthinkable. During this stage, the vulnerabilities were present, but ignored. An increasingly centralized food processing system and a just-in-time logistics network designed for perfect efficiency with zero redundancy. A single disruption could shatter the chain. Then comes Stage 2, price shocks and supply chain strain. This is the moment the abstract threat becomes real. Look at Venezuela in the early 2010s. After years of economic mismanagement, the country was dependent on imports. When global oil prices crashed, the government's revenue vanished. Suddenly, the dollars needed to import food disappeared. The first sign for the average citizen wasn't an empty shelf. It was the price. The cost of flour, milk, and chicken began to leap. Or consider Lebanon. Since 2019, it has been gripped by one of the worst economic crises in modern history. Its currency has lost over 98% of its value. The price of food has surged by an almost unimaginable 260 times since 2019. It started with people noticing the rising cost of imported goods. Then it hit staples. Soon, a middle-class salary could barely cover a week's worth of groceries. The supply chain, starved of foreign currency, seized. Now look at the United States, starting in 2021. The first price shocks hit. We were told it was transitory inflation, but the shocks kept coming. Grocery prices saw their steepest increases in decades. The accumulated price increases became embedded in the system. According to a Purdue University report, this persistence of high prices is a key reason food insecurity is now rising again. Between January and October of 2025, roughly 14% of U.S. households reported food insecurity, a notable increase from 12.5% in 2024. The supply chain strain became visible. Shipping containers piled up at ports. We saw bizarre, rolling shortages of everything from cream cheese to cat food. These were the first cracks in the facade of abundance. The system was flashing a warning light. That is the function of Stage 2. Stage 3, the normalization of shortages. Stage 3 is where the unthinkable becomes routine. The shock of seeing an empty shelf gives way to the weary expectation of it. Society adapts, and in doing so, it normalizes its own decline. In this stage, the word shortage becomes part of the daily vocabulary. Shopping is no longer an errand. It becomes a scavenger hunt. You go to one store for chicken, another for pasta. This exact behavior was rampant in Venezuela as the crisis deepened. People developed a sense for supply trucks, forming lines, or colas, hours before a store opened, with no guarantee of what might be inside. Shopping became a full-day, strategic operation. They adapted to the scarcity mindset, buying whatever was available, whenever it was available. We saw a more organized version of this in World War II Britain. Before official rationing, unpredictable supply disruptions led to a normalization of making do. People learned to substitute, to stretch, to go without. When the government finally introduced formal rationing, it was almost a relief. It institutionalized a scarcity people were already experiencing. Now, consider the United States in the last couple of years. Have you found yourself subconsciously scanning shelves for gaps? This is the psychological footprint of Stage 3. It's the quiet hoarding, not the panic buying of the pandemic, but a steady accumulation. People buy an extra bag of rice or can of beans with each shopping trip. They are not building a bunker. They are building a small buffer against an uncertainty they now feel is permanent. This behavior creates a vicious cycle. Consumer anxiety leads to precautionary buying, which creates artificial shortages on a just-in-time system, which in turn fuels more anxiety. We also see the institutional version of scarcity. Shrinkflation, where the package stays the same size but the contents get smaller. The danger of stage 3 is that it creates a false sense of stability. Humans are adaptable. We can get used to a slowly degrading standard of living, but the system is running with no slack. This sets the stage for the psychological break of stage 4, where frustration boils over into a crisis of faith. Stage 4. The crisis of faith. The USA is here. This is the breaking point. Stage 4 is where a food crisis stops being an economic problem and becomes a social and political one. The defining feature is a catastrophic loss of trust. Trust in the government, trust in corporations, and trust in the future itself. It is the stage of widespread, palpable public anxiety. And this is precisely where the United States is today. First, the historical parallel. In Lebanon, stage 4 was explosive. As the currency collapsed and grocery prices became astronomical, public worry turned to rage. Protests erupted not just about the price of bread, but about a profound sense of betrayal by a ruling class that seemed immune to the suffering. The crisis of faith became permanent. Today, 1 in 5 people in Lebanon, around 1.17 million, face acute food insecurity, with projections that the number will continue to rise. Now, turn the lens on the United States. The signs of stage 4 are quantifiable. Polls consistently show that inflation and the cost of living are the primary concerns for Americans. The Conference Board's Consumer Confidence Index fell sharply in November 2025, citing pessimism about business conditions and job prospects. This anxiety is translating directly into desperation. Demand at food banks is surging. In Iowa, a food pantry in Urbandale reported that demand in November 2025 was unlike anything we've seen. Even after a recent government shutdown that threatened SNAP benefits ended, food banks reported that the high demand did not let up. This is not a story about the unemployed. Reports indicate a surge in working families and seniors on fixed incomes who can no longer make ends meet. But perhaps the most definitive marker of stage 4 is the loss of faith in the institutions meant to solve the problem. In a move that shocked the anti-hunger community, the USDA announced in September 2025 that it was terminating its annual Household Food Security Report after 30 years. The agency called the report redundant, costly, politicized, and extraneous. Advocates immediately pushed back, calling the report the gold standard for measuring hunger and arguing its cancellation signals that tracking the problem is no longer a priority. This is stage 4 in its purest form. At the exact moment the crisis is escalating, the primary tool for measuring it is being dismantled. It creates an information vacuum that breeds suspicion and fear that the problem is being deliberately hidden. The last official government report, using 2023 data, found that 47.4 million people in America lived in food-insecure households. We are now seeing a rise in food insecurity in 2025, and the official instrument to track it is being terminated. The slow-burning stress of high prices, the visible strain on food banks, and the erosion of trust in official data all point to one conclusion. The United States has firmly entered stage 4. The system isn't just strained, the public's belief in it is breaking. Stage 5. Centralized control and desperation. When a society's faith in the free market to provide food is broken, the government inevitably steps in. Stage 5 is the phase of centralized control, a desperate attempt to restore order when shelves are bare and prices are out of reach. It is defined by policies that were once unthinkable: price controls, government distribution, and rationing. The classic American example is World War II. Starting in 1942, the Office of Price Administration rationed a host of goods: sugar, coffee, meat, cheese, butter, and canned goods. Every person was issued ration books. To buy a pound of beef, you needed money and the required number of ration points. It was a massive bureaucratic intrusion, but it was accepted as a patriotic necessity. At the same time, the government promoted victory gardens. By 1944, an estimated 20 million home gardens were producing an astonishing 40% of all fresh vegetables consumed in the U.S., relieving immense pressure on the commercial system. Now, look at a modern, dysfunctional example: Venezuela's CLAP program. As hyperinflation made food prices meaningless, the government created this system in 2016 to deliver boxes of subsidized staples directly to households. But it quickly became a tool of political control. Numerous reports have documented that the boxes were distributed based on political allegiance. If you supported the government, you received your box. If you were an opponent, it might never arrive. The program has also been mired in corruption, with claims that insiders imported food at inflated prices, profiting from the crisis. It was Stage 5 used to enforce loyalty. What could Stage 5 look like in the United States? It would be digital. Imagine, in the face of uncontrollable food inflation, the government implements price controls on essential items. This would predictably create massive shortages, forcing the next step: a digital rationing system. Perhaps a new function on EBT cards or a central bank digital currency could allocate a certain number of food credits per month. It would be pitched as the only fair way to ensure everyone gets a share. We've already seen the fragility of these systems. During the government shutdown in late 2025, the funding for SNAP was thrown into chaos, threatening the benefits of over 40 million people and causing an immediate panic. It was a stress test that revealed how a political stalemate could, almost overnight, turn off the food safety net for a huge portion of the population. Stage 5 is the government's final attempt to manage the crisis. When that fails, society falls to the next, more dangerous level. Stage 6. The breakdown of civil order. Stage 6 is where the veneer of civilization wears thin. The social contracts that we take for granted, rule of law and public safety, begin to disintegrate under the pressure of widespread hunger. When the government's centralized controls fail, people take matters into their own hands. This is the stage of black markets, food riots, and a parallel economy where survival is the only currency. In Venezuela, as the official CLAP boxes became insufficient, a sprawling black market exploded. People with connections would divert subsidized food and resell it at astronomical prices. This created a two-tier system. Those with access to black markets could eat, while those who relied on the failing state system could not. This environment breeds crime. Food truck hijackings became common. Warehouses were looted. The violence was not born of malice, but of the primal need to feed one's family. Even in post-WWII Germany, the hyperinflation of the Weimar Republic led to a similar breakdown. Farmers refused to sell goods for worthless paper money, leading to food riots, where desperate city dwellers marched into the countryside to take food directly from farms. What are the warning signs of Stage 6 in the United States? We are not there, but the fault lines are visible. First, the emergence of large-scale, organized black markets for essential goods, diverting entire truckloads from the supply chain. Second, a marked increase in crimes targeting the food supply itself. Not just shoplifting, but organized raids on warehouses and hijacking of delivery trucks. This would create a death spiral of rising security costs and higher prices. Third, food riots. The spontaneous protests of Stage 4 would give way to targeted, violent acts of desperation, overwhelming a supermarket or blockading a distribution center. Law enforcement would be put in an impossible position, no longer just keeping order, but guarding food from a hungry population. To believe this is impossible is to fall prey to the same normalcy bias that defined Stage 1. Every society is only a few missed meals away from chaos. Stage 7. Famine and societal reset. Stage 7 is the abyss. It is the complete and catastrophic failure of every system designed to feed a population. It is famine. And it leads to a fundamental, often violent, reset of society. In this stage, life is organized around a single principle: acquiring enough calories to survive until the next day. Historical examples are a chilling warning. The Holodomor in Ukraine in the 1930s and the Great Chinese Famine from 1959 to 1961 were not just crop failures. They were breakdowns of society where tens of millions died and all social norms were erased by starvation. What keeps a nation on the brink from falling into Stage 7? Often, it is a combination of a threadbare internal safety net and massive international intervention. This is the story of modern Venezuela and Lebanon. They have avoided full-blown famine because of programs like CLAP in Venezuela, corrupt and inefficient, but still providing a baseline of calories, and the critical intervention of international organizations like the World Food Program in Lebanon. As of mid-2025, the WFP was providing assistance to hundreds of thousands of people in Lebanon, an external life support system for a country whose own systems have failed. But this reliance is a vulnerability. What happens when donor nations have their own crises? For the United States, one of the world's largest food producers, the idea of famine seems impossible. The danger is not in production, but in distribution. A Stage 7 scenario in a modern nation would be caused by a Stage 6 breakdown so severe that the systems connecting farms to cities are completely severed. If hijacking and civil unrest becomes so rampant that trucks cannot move, if fuel becomes unavailable, or if the financial system collapses, then the abundance on the farms is irrelevant. The cities, where the vast majority of the population lives, would be cut off. This is the ultimate lesson of the 7-stage sequence. The descent is incremental. Each stage makes the next more likely. We have journeyed through the 7 stages of a food crisis. We have seen how this pattern has unfolded in World War II, Venezuela, and Lebanon. The evidence presented is not a prophecy. It is a diagnosis. The persistent price shocks, the surging demand at food banks, the quantifiable public anxiety, and the stunning decision to terminate the federal government's primary tool for tracking hunger, all of these are undeniable symptoms. The United States is exhibiting all the hallmarks of a nation in Stage 4, a crisis of faith. We are at a pivotal moment. The trust that holds our complex society together is eroding. History shows us that what comes next, the heavy hand of centralized control, and the potential for civil disorder if that control fails, is a much darker path. This is not a political issue. It is a structural one. The fragility of our just-in-time food system and the deep economic anxieties felt by millions are realities that transcend politics. To ignore them is to embrace the complacency of Stage 1. The purpose of this analysis is clarity and urgency. The first step in solving a problem is to acknowledge its existence and its scale. The warning lights are flashing. The question that remains is, will we recognize the stage we are in and take action to prevent the next one? Or will we continue down the path, ignoring the pattern until the ground gives way?